Book 101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's expert professional trainer, exercise scientist, fitness writer, and health and wellness consultant. No other than Mr. Dominic Angelino. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Dominic, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for the really fun introduction. Quite a lot about myself in general. So I did actually get into fitness from the standpoint of somebody who is very obese. When I was in high school, I lost over 130 pounds in what is objectively far too short of a time period because I had no idea what I was doing. I just kind of like went with it. And then, over time, just things naturally fall into place as it does with like every career, and eventually it ended up becoming like my orientation in life. And even though I like broadly work in fitness, I work in like pretty much every corner of it. Like I've worked with YouTubers, I've worked with like writing stuff, research science, like apps, whatever. So pretty all over the place to be honest, but honestly I enjoy that because I don't know, things are fun when they're more varied.
Mr. Dominic Angelino, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. And today, what we gonna talk about?
Yeah, so today, My Hero Academia. I'm not sure if anybody is too familiar with it. There is one character in particular from My Hero Academia who honestly inspired and motivated me quite a lot in ways that have actually had like a tangible impact on my life, and I feel like are actually pretty translatable to experiences of somebody who's actually trying to improve their fitness or health. So it's kind of cool because there's that natural like career tie-in.
Mhm. So let's do talk about also your Hero Academia. If I'm not mistaken, what first drew you to start reading My Hero Academia?
Yeah, so honestly, the thing that got me started at first was so I'm somebody who goes to a lot of anime conventions because I'm a big weeb and into all things nerdy, like games, anime, whatever. And the time that My Hero Academia, like the anime, started coming out, a lot of people had started dressing up as characters from the series. So like going around the anime con, I'm like I saw this like costume, this cosplay like 20 times. So like when I got home, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like research this, learn a little bit about it, and then I started reading, and I was really hooked from the beginning. It had a very strong intro.
How would you describe Midoriya's journey from the beginning to where you are in the series?
That's a good question. So it's really interesting because it's not necessarily this like fully linear thing, like it starts out with him just being an ordinary child in a world where everybody has superpowers. He doesn't have a superpower, and then due to the strength of his personality and decisions he'd made with his own agency, he is given an opportunity by somebody who's quite powerful to basically have his own superpower, and then he uses that to achieve quite a lot with his life, going through somewhat typical hero's journey. But there are, of course, like like a few points where it kind of dips, and he starts exploring a bit more of like the role of like a dark side villain type person. But yeah, it's really just a story about like using agency to make the most of the situation that you're in life.
So, Mr. Dominic, if we compare Midoriya as yourself as a expert personal trainer, exercise scientist, fitness writer, and health wellness consultant, how would you compare?
Uh, that's a good question. So, unfortunately, I do not have superpowers. That's the first thing I want to point out. I have to like that reality like daily. But Yeah, so I think one thing is just the application of just like, agency to move forward in life and to just kind of try to like keep smiling and to continue moving forward even when the situation you're in is bleak, or even when you encounter like a negative, something negative, right? Like there's like some negative feedback to something in terms of like failure, you get harmed. Um, and that's firstly relevant like in professional stuff, right? Because like the more you focus on moving forward and making progress in life and just taking like one step forward, independent of your start point, the closer you get to not only your goals, but the more you accomplish along the way. Because like even if you don't necessarily like achieve like a discrete goal, getting part of the way there still means you still achieve something, right? And that also translates to like people that are like totally working on their own fitness journey and whatnot. Because I think a lot of times, right, like people look at this goal that they set for themselves, like, oh, I'm going to lose like 20 pounds or 30 pounds, and if they don't get all the way there, they feel like they're a failure. But hey, if you set out to lose 20 pounds and you lost 10 pounds, you didn't necessarily just fail at losing 20 pounds. You succeeded at losing 10 pounds. It's still super awesome. It's something to be proud of.
Very well said, Mr. Dominic. Very well said.
Yeah.
Yes, what do you think makes Midoriya's compelling main character?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's really just one of the things that's compelling, I think, is that it's somewhat relatable to a lot of people, not necessarily just myself. But a lot of people experience this like struggle, especially I think early on in your life when you're like a teenager, and like a bit on the younger side, the struggle between doing what is most effective in life and like pursuing a goal effectively in a meaningful way versus like focusing on the way that you appear to be pursuing something, right? Like the idea of like social media, oftentimes a lot of times people project like a false sense of themselves to the world and focus on cultivating like a perception around that versus like instead like alternatively somebody like focusing on achieving like an actual objective independent of the perception. And I feel like honestly Midoriya, like he kind of encapsulates that like pretty well, because he is a character who very consistently he always does what he perceives to be the right thing in pretty much any situation independent of how people see him. So there are those like moments, right, where like it just looks like it, like it feels like awkward if you do something and you're like, oh, people are going to see me do this and assume I'm doing something, misperceive what's happening. But like Deku just kind of like powers through that, and it doesn't necessarily matter how people perceive him as long as he's like actually working towards helping somebody.
How did you feel when Midoriya inherited one for all for the first time?
Honestly, I thought it was cool. Like, I was pretty excited. Like, I see because that's the thing that like really hooked me on the freaking series because firstly, I'm somebody that loves any sort of story where there is a character that just becomes more powerful and like they invest in themselves and they just keep getting more powerful. That's always been like inherently cool to me. And I don't know, it was this really beautiful like emotional moment, right? Where this because like the way that like he'd inherited One for All was that it was given to him by this person who is known as this like the greatest hero in history, basically, right? This guy who just seemed untouchable. And it was this first time that like Deku got to really like get close to this world that he'd been barred from his entire life due to circumstances. And honestly, I kind of felt that because like for me, there like I had a background that was like not very much on the education-y side of things. Like growing up like a first generation college student and didn't have the best family background and whatnot. So like there's certain things in the world that felt kind of like barred to me, right? I'm like I can't like achieve things, and I can't really go far in life or whatever. And that was just this kind of like generally held belief through a lot of my younger years. And then over time, I grew as a person and kept moving forward, and then like you suddenly get to these places where you're like, wow, I'm like actually here, like these people and these places and these institutions that like I genuinely didn't believe like I could ever touch or come near are like actually like things I'm interacting with now. And I feel like that's kind of what Deku is going through, and that's a really cool thing. And also the cool thing about that too, right, is that like I'm not like anything special in that sense. It's something that like anybody can do with like agency, right? Like you just like if you just keep moving forward, you eventually just get farther forward. That's like how moving forward works, and that inherently like starts to bridge the gap between like wherever you are now and wherever the things that feel rather untainable to you are.
Interesting, Mr. Dominic. Interesting indeed. Which moment in the manga stands out to you as Midoriya's biggest growth point?
Whew, biggest growth point. It's interesting, right? Because like he's like one of the he's the type of character who's like always growing. Like that's part of his thing. Especially because like he's also like in high school and like it's that kind of like framing where it's like okay, character in school always growing. Um, but I would say probably the biggest growth point actually comes closer to like the end of everything. Right? There's this point in the manga where he basically goes in the direction of becoming sort of like a vigilante, where he decides like, hey, if I do things that are, if I kind of like cut corners and take like a Batman-esque approach to crime, fighting crime, I will be able to achieve more, and that kind of leads him to this like down this pretty dark path, right? Like it's one of those things where you take like it's almost like the antithesis of like everything else in the story thus far, where like he's now starting to take like baby step after baby step towards the dark side, and you kind of see that happen. And I think and that all culminates in this moment where he ends up in I guess what is a battle against all of the friends and people he'd grown up with, the people that were like other heroes that were in his class when he was like younger. And this kind of like him being positioned against them made him start to really forced him to really reflect and realize that he's not necessarily going down the best path and that there are like other ways to you know proceed and like save people. Like he doesn't necessarily have to do everything alone, and he doesn't necessarily have to cut corners in the way that he has been, because like at that point he just kind of becomes more I guess like of an adult hero in a sense, because he then moving forward in the story he has that sort of like bigger picture perspective in his decision making where he's not as much focused on like the immediate effect of his actions solely, but it's like the immediate effect in context of like the bigger picture.
The bigger picture, people. So, Mr. Dominic, how do you think Moderia's struggle with self-doubt make him relatable?
Whew, I mean, I guess in general, right? Like a lot of people deal with self-doubt like in different ways in their life, whether it's in like their personal life with like friends, family, relationships, or like professional life, or like what have you. um but yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because the thing about it for Deku, I feel like for a lot of people, myself included, I would see it as more like aspirational than something that's like naturally relatable to a lot of people. Because like this goes back to what I was saying earlier with like the idea that he always focuses on doing what he feels is best independent of like perception or all the other things like that, right? And that's true for self-doubt as well, because like early on when he was probably dealing with a whole heck of a lot of imposter syndrome, he always focuses on optimizing what he's doing so that he could most effectively achieve his goal. Like, he kind of like tunes everything else out, and he's like, okay, so now that this is all tuned out, how do I save this person? How do I help this person? How do I pass this test? How do I do this? And like his ability to just put it aside, I think is something that is kind of relatable. And also, like, I'm not necessarily advocating for like compartmentalizing and ignoring emotions, because it is healthy to like acknowledge and deal with like any like self doubt somebody has or like emotions or whatnot. But I guess like in this case, it's more like he is at least not allowing it to limit him, and him not allowing it to limit him is what I find like aspirational, and I think is something that some people can relate to, at least in their best moments.
What is your favorite battle or fight scene so far in the
Favorite
manga?
battle? There are so many cool ones. Okay, so there was. See, I keep like stumbling because I'm like, okay, there's this one and there's that one, and they're all so freaking cool. Oh gosh. I think there is one actually that didn't even involve like Midoriya slash. He sometimes goes by the name. He also goes by the name like Deku in the series as well, so they could be used like interchangeably. But there is a character called Mario Togata, who is just basically, let's shorthand, it's like another hero, right? Doing his thing, and his entire arc is centered around saving a little girl who is in trouble. And his whole life, Mario had worked from a position where he had a very, very useless superpower to becoming an extremely skilled and talented hero, just simply through hard work and like application of his own agency, right? And he when he finally got close to his like objective of saving this little girl, he realized he had a choice. He could basically leap forward and guarantee that she'd be safe, and then lose his superpowers forever, or like risk it. At that point, he wasn't like super sure, but it would be absurdly likely. Or he could just like take an action that was like safer for him, but wouldn't be as likely to keep her definitively safe. And like he just like leapt forward and like protected her in this like fight against like a villain. And I always thought that was really cool, and it was this really like interesting emotional peak, right? Because this all happened in the context of him fighting like the main villain of that particular arc. And it turned into this situation, right, where like the battle wasn't necessarily the typical battle of like, I'm gonna punch you in the face until your face is all bruised, and then you're gonna try to do the same to me, and then whoever stops moving first loses. It became more of this like philosophical battle in a sense, right? Layered onto the physical battle. That juxtaposed Mario's whole thing with that of like the villain of that arc. And it's interesting because like although like when Mario jumped in the way to like save the girl, and he was hit with something that caused him to lose his superpower, basically, it was a battle that like on the surface it looks like he lost, right? Because he lost in like the physical tangible sense, but in the philosophical sense he actually won.
So, Mr. Dominic, what would be your short-term and long-term goals as a breeder or expert personal trainer, exercise scientist, fitness writer, and health and wellness consultant?
Short and long term goals in which sense?
In all those aspects that I told you, being as a breeder, expert personal trainer.
Yeah, so gosh, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because like I mentioned, like I work on like a lot of different things and go in a bajillion different directions. So I tend to kind of like take things as they come, you know. I'm not so much like a person who has like a tangible, like definitive, like okay, I want to go like a 5 year plan type person. I'm much more of just somebody who, I mean, I've learned, at least for me, this works quite well. Just like making the most of opportunities when they present themselves, and moving forward. Like so that's something I'd continue to do both short and long term. But like honestly, like it may sound kind of silly like at first, but honestly, I just want to be happy. Like that's honestly my goal. Like to be real. So like whatever facilitates that, I'm down for. And like I recognize, right? Like I'm rather variable I change, my environment changes, and trying to like predict all that stuff in advance, like what I'll be like in a year, what I'll want in a year, what's going to be around me in a year, etc. In some sense, like yeah, there is some like value to it, but it, at least for me, it also feels like in my case, it's can feel like a little like futile in a sense, because like whenever I'm in a situation, I'll figure out like hey, it makes me happy and live a life that I'm content with, and oftentimes that does involve me doing a bunch of things in a bunch of areas because I really like, I've discovered, to make impact with the work that I do, and I like making different types of impact. And I find that really, really fulfilling. Like I do, in addition to the stuff I do publicly, I also do like a lot of ghost type stuff, like ghost writing. I do like ghost comedy writing. Not writing about ghosts, but like like do comedic things as a ghostwriter, and all this other stuff. And like sometimes I like work on like children's books and things, and I like going into all those areas because it just feels fulfilling to be like, hey, like I'm making an impact on a bunch of people this way and a bunch of people that way, etc. And I've also found that I like to do things at scale. I've discovered like earlier on in my career, right? I started out like in a way that is very traditional for a lot of people in the fitness industry. I was more on the typical personal trainer side of things, where it's like you're always just one on one with somebody in a gym or things of that nature. But over time, I found like I was happier when I did work that would impact like a lot of people at once rather than just like one person at a time. Not to say that there isn't value in impacting one person at a time, because there is, especially on like an emotional level, right? You get to have a really high magnitude impact on one person's life if you have like a really personal connection with them and you facilitate, them achieving their goals. But for me personally, even though that is valuable and I have gotten emotional with clients before when they've done really cool things that they were really excited about, I uh, I think for me, like the thing that works best is just focusing on mass impact in whichever ways I can.
Very well said, and good luck to your goals, Mr. Dominic. Looking for more success, whatever you want in your life. For me, I want to be happy always too. And what would be your advice for those people out there who want to have a good weight or having a good fitness?
Hmm. Ooh, that's a good question. So, firstly, I'm glad that like you also want to be happy because we're like happy buddies now. That's kind of cool. um, but yeah, so it's really interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people tend to focus on the output aspect of fitness, right? They tend to focus on optimizing for a certain output, where the output is like losing a given amount of weight, like losing 5 to 10 pounds, building 5 to 10 pounds of muscle, or whatever it is, right? But an interesting thing is that the input of exercise is always inherently going to be related to the output. So, for example, if the thing that you do, like the input is your behavior, right? So if you change how much you eat, that will inherently influence the output of what happens to your body weight. So with that in mind, I think the best thing is really just to focus on the input, right? Find things that you could do that you can stick to and just do that. A lot of the conventional things that y'all think of, like they work, right? Like move more, eat in a more conventionally healthy way. But one of the reasons people really get stuck when they try to achieve those things is that they make their weight loss journey super hard for themselves. And it makes sense that they do that. Firstly, because there's so much media framing around that, right? Like there is like all this stuff with like no pain, no gain, which implies that like you need pain to achieve your goals, which makes it hard to achieve them because who wants to keep going like forward if they're always in pain? That's not good. Um, but yeah, like uh, if you just focus on doing what's sustainable, what you can maintain, what you're happy with, you'll be better off in the future, independent of what your end weight ends up being. And to that end, it's also important to keep in mind that victory in that sense isn't necessarily just losing weight, right? Because like let's say if your goal is to lose 10 pounds or like you just want to lose weight in general, and you focus on moving more, living a healthier life, eating in a way that better fits your lifestyle, etc. But you're not like super perfect with it, right? You might end up in a situation where you actually gain weight. But it's important to keep in mind that because you've taken the action of moving more and eating better, you're actually in a better position than if you hadn't done that, right? Because in this scenario, you may have only gained like 5 pounds, but like if you didn't do any of that, you would have gained like 10 pounds instead. So in reality, you technically pseudo lost 5 pounds. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, right? Because focus it'll help you stay motivated, and it also I think reminds you of like the value of what you're doing. Anytime you do anything that's healthy for you, you aren't actually ever going to truly waste that, at least in almost any instance, aside from like extreme cases where somebody's like injured and like there's a whole thing there. But or but in general, for like a healthy person, like it's always helpful because like you will be in a better place than if you did nothing, even if it's not super evident. And being a bit healthier today, it means like you're going to have a better future. You're more likely to live longer. You're more likely to not only live longer, but you'll be more likely to have a high quality of life when you're older, right? And that's something a lot of us don't tend to like think about very much. But generally the idea of like when you are older, being able to raise your hands above your head to like grab something off the top shelf or like carry groceries, that's something that some people struggle with. And it makes sense that they do because they weren't active earlier in life. But it'll be a lot easier to get through those 65 plus years of life if you choose to be active, more active early on.
Thank you for your advice, Mr. Dominic. Before we wrap up our discussion, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my one of my audiobooks, people audiobooks. Of course, my Book 101 Review Volume 3 Hot Suggestions, Book 101 Review Volume 2 Selected, and Book 101 Review Volume 1 Highly Recommended. These are the products of my first season on Book 101 review, and on one of my self-help books, Threads of Existence, Weaving the Tapestry of Life, and Stand Tall, Stand Together, Breaking the Chains of Bullying, and Life is Too Short, a journey of discovery, fulfillment, and joy. And my climate change book, Earth Fever, The Unraveling Climate, and Our Race to Restore Balance. Please do listen to them. They are one of the best sellers on Audible. So, Mr. Dominic, after reading My Hero Academia, how has your view of what it means to be a hero changed?
That's an interesting question. What it means to be a hero. Yeah, I mean, I guess one thing that it's really underscored for me was, the idea that, like, even on a lesser level, right? Like, even less than a hero, but being like a helpful person or like a good friend, that involves being able to stay emotionally strong in the sense that you're able to still be there for your friends, right? Because there are a lot of instances where a characters like Mario or like Deku, they encounter difficulty or encounter difficult situations, but they're still able to be happy and like be there for their friends and not like completely shut down. And I think honestly, just like seeing that, right, like help me help really underscore how important that is, and that resulted in me actually like centering that like as a bit more of a focus in my life for quite a while, where I would just try to get better at not allowing negative things to really like shut me down, um, so that I could actually like be better at being there for my friends. And honestly, that's something I struggled with, right? Like I have an anxiety disorder and stuff like that, which like is much better now, much better now after working at it for quite a while. But that was one of the things that resulted in me like shutting down, having panic attacks and stuff like that all the time, and getting, seeing these characters just smile and continue to like help people even when things are hard for them. just highlighted how important that is.
Mr. Domenic Angelino, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. You can please invite our listeners to support all your projects to come.
Cool. Yeah, yeah, no, I'd appreciate that. And if anybody wants to follow me on Blue Sky at Dominic Domenic Health Health.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Dominic Angelino because if you support him more and more and more, empowering fitness to come. So, Mr. Dominic, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate it a ton.
More to come, people. See you soon.